Based on the uploaded RXT file, write a completely new story with the same content and theme. You do not need to keep the same plot, events, or characters. Use this file only as inspiration to create a new, unique plot with new characters, conflicts, and resolutions. Maintain flowing American English prose with proper punctuation, capitalization, and paragraph formatting. Write a coherent story, without paragraphs or breaks, as a storyteller would. The story should be unique, creative, and engaging, while maintaining the same tone and atmosphere as the original file. Divide the entire story into 5 parts, each 2,500 words. These 5 parts should be enough to make a complete story. Write me part 1 first, and when I finish, I will request the next part. Even though it's divided into parts, write the story in a coherent manner so that by part 5, the final part, I can piece them together into a complete story. The silence that followed her escape was heavier, colder than any she had known before. Adrenaline gave way to a bone-deep exhaustion as Elara nursed the crippled wraith through the nebula's hidden veins, a wounded beast seeking its lair. The ship was a mess. The surge she'd forced through its systems had fried half the auxiliary conduits. The Project Echo system was a molten slag of wires. And the core breach, once stable, now pulsed with a sickly green light, leaking trace amounts of radiation that made her teeth ache. She'd won the battle of wits, but the cost had been staggering. Her own ship, the Rancor, was gone, a ghost of a memory swallowed by the void, and the Wraith itself was now little more than a drifting tomb, cloaked and silent, but utterly immobile. For 3 days, she worked, powered only by the ship's emergency batteries and her own grim determination, patching what she could, rerouting power through undamaged lines, and running diagnostics on the sub-reality drive. The results were always the same catastrophic failure. The drive's primary energy matrix had been shattered, and at its heart was a void where a key component should be the harmonic resonator, a piece of Commonwealth technology so advanced, so rare, it was practically a myth. It was a crystalline lattice designed to stabilize the chaotic energies of sub-reality, to essentially anchor the ship to the material universe while it was phased out. Without it, activating the drive wouldn't just fail, it would tear the Wraith apart atom by atom, creating a localized black hole in the process. Elara stared at the schematics. The empty space on the diagram, a glaring accusation. Her father had spoken of these resonators, marveling at their theoretical complexity. They were grown, not built, in zero-gravity labs under conditions that hadn't existed since the fall of the Commonwealth. Finding one was impossible. Almost. Her mind sifted through years of black market chatter, of whispers shared in the shadowed corners of lawless spaceports. There was one place, a festering wound in the fabric of civilized space, where the impossible was merely expensive gallows drift. It was an asteroid station, a hollowed-out rock spun up for gravity, cobbled together from the wrecks of a dozen forgotten wars. It was a haven for smugglers, assassins, information brokers, and anyone else who valued anonymity over safety. The Dominion officially ignored it, considering its chaotic population self-policing, but Elara knew better. The Dominion ignored nothing. They merely watched, waiting for the right moment to cauterize the infection. Limping to Gallows Drift was a risk of monumental proportions, but it was her only option. She managed to coax a flicker of life from the Wraith's conventional thrusters. just enough for a slow, agonizing journey to the edge of the nebula. The ship moved like a phantom, its damaged cloak flickering in and out of existence, a stuttering ghost against the backdrop of stars. She docked in a forgotten sector of the asteroid, a graveyard of decommissioned freighters and skeletal ship frames, paying a corrupt dockmaster an exorbitant fee in refined alien metals to look the other way. Stepping onto the station was like stepping into a different universe. The silence of the Wraith was replaced by a cacophony of noise, the hiss of failing life support, the distant clang of metal on metal, the murmur of a dozen different languages, human and alien, all underpinned by the low thrum of the station's ancient reactor. The air was thick with the smell of unscrubbed bodies, spicy alien cuisine, and the acrid tang of plasma discharge. Alara moved through the crowded corridors like a wraith herself, her face obscured by the hood of her worn spacer's cloak, her hand never far from the modified plasma pistol holstered at her hip. She was looking for one man, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and respect, Kalen. He was an information broker, a purveyor of rare tech, and, according to the whispers, a survivor of the Commonwealth's fall with a particular hatred for the Dominion. Finding him was a test in itself. She followed a trail of cryptic clues, of half-answered questions and exchanged data chips, descending deeper into the station's grimy underbelly. She found him in a dimly lit workshop, a cavernous space cluttered with a bizarre assortment of technology. Parts of Dominion interceptors were bolted next to the elegant, curved components of forgotten alien races, all humming and sparking in a chaotic symphony of controlled decay. Kalen was a man forged from scrap and cynicism. His face was a mask of scar tissue, one organic eye a sharp, intelligent gray, the other a whirring cybernetic replacement that clicked softly as it tracked her movements. His hands, stained with grease and littered with burn marks, were currently manipulating the delicate inner workings of a Dominion tracker drone. He didn't look up as she approached. "If you're here for parts, the price has doubled. If you're here for information, it's tripled. If you're Dominion—" He paused, a low growl in his voice. "You won't be leaving." "I'm looking for a harmonic resonator," Alara said, her voice flat, betraying no emotion. Kalen froze. His cybernetic eye swiveled to focus on her, its red optic glowing brighter. He slowly set down his tools and turned, his organic eye narrowing. "That's not just a part, that's a ghost story. Commonwealth tech. Pre-purge. The kind of thing that gets you noticed by people you don't want noticing you." "I'm aware of the risks," she replied, pulling back her hood just enough to reveal the sharp, determined lines of her face. "I'm also aware you're one of the few people in this sector who might know where to find one." Kalen studied her for a long moment, his gaze analytical, searching. His cybernetic eye clicked, likely running a scan against some internal database. "You have the look of a survivor," he finally said, his voice less hostile, more weary. "Xylos Prime." Ilara flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. "Does it matter? It always matters." He sighed, turning back to his workbench. "The last time I heard someone asking for a resonator, they ended up as a red smear on the side of a Dominion battlecruiser. That tech is a death sentence." "Everything in this galaxy is a death sentence," Ilara countered. "Some are just quicker than others. Can you find it or not?" He was silent for a time, the only sound the soft whirring of his eye. "Maybe," he said at last. "There's a collector, a crime lord named Vorlag. He fancies himself a historian of the Commonwealth's fall, hoards its relics like holy artifacts. He has one, keeps it in his private vault, aboard his personal cruiser, the Carrion. It's permanently docked in the high security sector of the drift. "I'll pay," Ilara said, ready to offer the last of her valuable alien alloys. Kalen laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Vorlag doesn't deal in currency. He deals in favors, in blood, and he wouldn't sell that piece for all the credits in the galaxy. If you want it, you'll have to steal it." He turned to face her fully, a grim, calculating look in his eye. "And that's where I come in. I can get you the schematics for his ship, the patrol routes of his guards, a window in his security grid. But it will cost you, not credits, information. That ship you're trying to fix, it's the Wraith, isn't it?" Ilara's blood ran cold. The name had never been spoken aloud, not by her, not once in 7 years. "How do you know that name?" she asked, her voice a dangerous whisper. "Because I helped build the damn thing," Kalen said, his voice dropping, filled with a sudden, raw bitterness. "I was a junior engineer at the Asphodel shipyards. I designed the power conduits for the sub-reality drive. I saw what it was capable of, and I saw the project get shut down, buried, before it ever had a chance to fight. I want to know it survived. I want to know it wasn't all for nothing." The revelation hung in the air between them, a shared history of loss and forgotten purpose. Ilara, the ghost of Xylos, and Kalen, the ghost of Asphodel, 2 survivors, bound by a machine that represented their last, best hope. "It survived," she confirmed, a silent pact forming between them. "But it won't fight without the resonator." "Then we'll get it for you," Kalen said, a new fire in his one good eye. While they planned, the galaxy outside Gallows Drift was stirring. Aboard the Dominion flagship Vigilance, Prefect Valerius reviewed the sensor logs from the Cerberus Nebula. He was a different breed of Dominion officer, not a brute, but a scholar of war, a patient, analytical predator, the phantom readings, the decoy dreadnought, the impossible energy signatures. It was all too elegant, too precise for a random anomaly. It was a strategy. It was human. He replayed the garbled comms from the patrol squadron, filtering out the static, enhancing the background noise, and there, buried deep in the data, was a fleeting, ghost-like energy signature, the barest whisper of a Commonwealth-era cloaking field. The reports of Project Wraith were not exaggerated, Valerius murmured to his aide, his thin lips curving into a semblance of a smile. "It exists, and its pilot is clever." He brought up a star chart, cross-referencing the ship's last known trajectory with known black sites and rogue stations. A vessel that damaged would need sanctuary. It would need rare parts. Send out deep cover probes to every lawless outpost within a 10-parsec radius. Scan for any whispers of pre-purge technology. The ghost has a trail. I want it found. Unaware of the new, more intelligent hunt that was beginning, Ilara prepared for the heist. Kalen's information was flawless. He gave her a data spike loaded with a virus that would temporarily blind the Carrion's internal sensors and a detailed holographic map of its ventilation system. The plan was simple, and therefore incredibly dangerous. She would enter through a waste disposal duct, navigate to the vault, cut through the door, take the resonator, and be out before the security loop reset. She moved through the high security sector like a phantom, her movements fluid and silent. A lifetime of hiding and running honed to a razor's edge. The inside of the carry-on was opulent, a grotesque mockery of Commonwealth design, all polished chrome and deep crimson carpets. Vorlag's guards were large, brutish mercenaries, more muscle than brain, easily avoided. The vault was another matter. It was a solid slab of neutronium alloy, impervious to any conventional cutting tool, but Kalen had anticipated this. He'd given her a small, experimental device, a molecular destabilizer he'd been working on for years. It'll only give you about 30 seconds before it overheats, he'd warned. And for God's sake, don't drop it. She placed the device on the vault door. It hummed, and the solid metal began to shimmer, its molecular bonds loosening, turning almost liquid. She pushed her way through the shimmering portal, the air thick with the smell of ozone, and found herself inside. The vault was a treasure trove of lost history Commonwealth battle flags, dress uniforms, decommissioned energy rifles, and there, in the center, resting on a pedestal of black obsidian, was the harmonic resonator. It was beautiful, a complex, crystalline structure that seemed to hum with a life of its own, its internal facets catching the light and refracting it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. She grabbed it, the crystal cool and smooth against her gloves, and turned to leave. That's when she heard the alarms. Not the ship's alarms. The station's alarms. A high-pitched, piercing shriek that meant only one thing: Dominion lockdown. She scrambled out of the vault just as the shimmering doorway solidified behind her. On a nearby monitor, she saw it, a Dominion probe, sleek and black, hovering just outside the station, its single red eye broadcasting a system-wide alert. Valerius's net had closed faster than she could have imagined. Her heart pounded in her chest. She was trapped. She activated her personal comm, a tight band frequency only Kalen could receive. They're here. The station is on lockdown. Kalen's voice came back, strained and urgent. I see it. They haven't breached the station yet. They're just scanning. But they will. Vorlag's men are everywhere. You can't get back the way you came. There's another way. An emergency coolant pipe. It runs from the engineering deck directly to the decommissioned sector where you're docked. It's a straight shot, but it's not pressurized. You'll be in hard vacuum. I can manage, Ilara said, already running. The resonator clutched tightly in a pouch at her side. Just make sure the Wraith is ready to fly. Ready is a strong word. Kalen grumbled back. But I've bypassed the docking clamps. The moment you're aboard, you can go. Now move. The prefect on that flagship is no fool. He'll have troops on this rock in minutes. She ran through the ship's corridors, a blur of motion and shadow, the sounds of shouting guards and klaxons echoing behind her. She reached the engineering deck, blew the hatch to the coolant pipe with a small plasma charge, and plunged into the cold, silent darkness of the vacuum. It was a terrifying, disorienting journey. Pulling herself along hand over hand through the massive pipe, the entire station groaning around her, she emerged back into the grimy, silent graveyard of the decommissioned sector, her own ship, the ghost she had claimed, waiting for her. The moment her boots hit the deck of the Wraith, she slammed the airlock shut and threw herself into the pilot's seat. The ship shuddered to life around her, its damaged systems groaning in protest. With the resonator now safely stowed, she had a fighting chance. As she guided the ship out of its hiding place, she saw them Dominion dropships, descending on Gallows Drift like wasps, their engines burning red against the blackness of space. She had the prize, but she was no longer a ghost. She was the hunted, and the man hunting her now knew her name, or at least the name of the ship she flew, and that was more than enough. The Wraith tore away from Gallows Drift, not with a roar, but with a whisper. Elara pushed the newly repaired sub-reality drive to a fraction of its capacity, just enough to blur the ship's edges, to make it a fleeting shadow that slipped through the closing Dominion blockade. On her screen, the station became a chaotic bloom of light and weapons fire as Valerius's troops began their methodical, brutal sweep. She could hear the panicked chatter on the open channels, the screams, the defiant last stands of smugglers and pirates who had mistaken their lawless freedom for true security. A cold knot tightened in her stomach. She had brought this down on them. Her quest, her obsession, had turned the Dominion's gaze upon this hive of scum and villainy, and the hive was being burned. Kalen's last transmission had been a string of encrypted coordinates and a simple, grim message: go. Don't look back. Make it count. He was buying her time, likely with his life, creating diversions, wiping logs, becoming another ghost in the machine. The weight of that sacrifice settled on her like a shroud. She jumped to the coordinates Kalen had provided, a chaotic, unstable asteroid field in an uncharted system known only by its designation, RX-9. It was a navigator's nightmare, a churning maelstrom of rock and ice, bombarded by the radiation of a nearby pulsar. It was the perfect place to disappear for weeks. She drifted, a ghost among ghosts, working tirelessly to integrate the harmonic resonator into the Wraith's drive core. It was a delicate, terrifying process. The technology was centuries beyond anything she had ever worked on, more art than science. The crystal seemed to sing to her, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in her bones, reacting to her touch, to the ship's systems, to the very fabric of space around it. As she worked, she began to understand. The sub-reality drive didn't just make the ship invisible, it shifted it, just slightly, out of phase with normal reality. It didn't move through space. It convinced space that it wasn't there at all. Her first full test of the drive was a heart-stopping leap of faith. She engaged the core, and the world outside the viewport dissolved. The churning asteroids, the stark light of the pulsar, the very stars themselves smeared into a pale, ethereal mist. The ship was silent, utterly still, adrift in a sea of non-existence. There were no G-forces, no sense of motion, just a profound and unsettling stillness. She was nowhere and everywhere. She could see the system she had just left, not as a point of light, but as a shimmering, three-dimensional tapestry of energy and gravity, a map made of pure physics. She could see the Dominion fleet, a cluster of angry red thorns, still circling the now silent Gallows Drift. She could feel their presence, not with sensors, but with an instinct she couldn't explain, a ripple in the nothingness. The Wraith wasn't just a ship anymore, it was a sensory organ, a new way of perceiving the universe. She spent months in that void, learning. She learned to navigate the sub-reality, to make short, precise jumps, re-emerging into normal space for scant seconds to verify her position before vanishing again. She learned to push the drive, to not just become invisible, but to project echoes of herself, to be in two places at once, a phantom and its shadow. She was no longer just a scavenger. She was a weapon, a ghost with a blade. And it was time to start haunting the empire that had taken everything from her. Her first targets were small, insignificant. A convoy of automated freighters carrying raw materials to a Dominion Forge world. She didn't destroy them. She simply appeared in their path. A silent, dark specter, and with a precisely targeted energy pulse, disabled their navigation systems, sending them spiraling off into the deep black. She watched from the safety of the void as the Dominion response teams arrived, finding nothing but empty ships and corrupted logs. Aboard the Vigilance, Prefect Valerius watched the reports come in, his expression a mask of cold fury. The attacks were whispers, pinpricks, acts of sabotage so subtle they were almost deniable. A communications relay in a key sector would go dark for exactly 3.7 minutes, just long enough to disrupt fleet logistics. A shipment of vital medical supplies would be rerouted to a dead-end system. A squadron of fighter drones would suddenly receive a recall order from a ghost signal, leaving a patrol route exposed. There was no pattern, no logic, just chaos. But Valerius saw the pattern. It was the pattern of a single, intelligent, and deeply patient mind. It was a campaign of psychological warfare. "It's testing us," Valerius stated to his subordinate, tracing the incidents on a galactic map. "It's learning our response times, our protocols, our weaknesses. It's not a terrorist. It's a strategist." He gave a new order. All fleet communications were to be routed through quantum-entangled relays, a technology so secure it was considered unbreakable. All patrol routes were to be randomized. He was changing the rules of the game, trying to trap a ghost in a net of pure logic. Ilara felt the shift immediately. The Dominion's movements became less predictable, their communications impenetrable. Her small acts of sabotage became more difficult, the risks higher. She realized Valerius was not some brutish commander. He was her equal, a hunter who understood his prey. The game had to change. She needed to escalate. She needed a target that would hurt them, that would make them bleed. She found it in the Erebus system. It was home to a massive orbital refinery, a critical node in the Dominion's war machine, processing the helium-3 that fueled their fleets. But it was also a prison. The refinery was crewed by political prisoners, by the populations of conquered worlds, by anyone the Dominion deemed undesirable. They were slaves, working in horrific conditions, their lives measured in production quotas. Among them, according to a fragmented data burst she'd intercepted, were survivors from a dozen different worlds, including a small contingent from Xylos Prime. The thought of her people enslaved, fueling the very ships that had destroyed their home, ignited a fire in her soul that had long been dormant. This would not be a pinprick attack. This would be a rescue, a liberation. The refinery, designated Tartarus, was a fortress. It was surrounded by a minefield, patrolled by a dedicated squadron of interceptors, and its surface bristled with point defense cannons. A direct assault was suicide, but the Wraith was not a conventional weapon. Ilara spent a week in sub-reality, observing. She studied the patrol patterns, the shift changes of the guards, the energy fluctuations of the station's shields, and she found a weakness, a single, fleeting moment. Every 12 hours, the station vented superheated plasma from its core, a byproduct of the refining process. During the 3-second vent, a small section of the station's shield had to be lowered, creating a temporary hole. It was an impossibly small window, but for the Wraith, it was an open door. The plan was insane. She would have to phase into reality inside the plasma vent, navigate through a storm of superheated gas, land in an unsecured maintenance hangar, and then get the prisoners out, all without being detected. As the moment of the vent approached, she sat in the pilot's seat, her hands steady on the controls, the low hum of the resonator a comforting presence. She felt a strange calm settle over her. This was what the Wraith was built for. This was what she was built for. She plunged the ship into the plasma stream. The world outside became a roaring inferno of white-hot energy. The ship's temperature alarm screamed, the hull groaning under the immense heat and pressure. She flew blind, relying on the ship's internal chronometer and the schematics burned into her memory. 3 seconds felt like an eternity. She emerged from the fire and into the relative quiet of the maintenance hangar. She was in. The hangar was deserted, a cavern of forgotten machinery and discarded parts. She disabled the hangar's internal surveillance with a targeted EMP, then sealed the main doors. Phase 1 was complete. Now, for the hard part, she donned a stolen Dominion Guard's uniform, its gray, sterile fabric feeling alien against her skin, and stepped out into the station. The interior of Tartarus was a vision of hell. The corridors were dark, slick with grime, the air thick with the stench of chemicals and despair. Everywhere she looked, she saw gaunt faces, hollow eyes, beings stripped of their identity, reduced to numbers. She saw humans, Takari, Vulpin, a dozen species, all wearing the same gray jumpsuits, their movements slow and listless. She found the Xylonian contingent in the deepest, most dangerous level of the refinery, near the volatile processing core. They were emaciated, their skin pale from lack of sunlight, but in their eyes, she saw a flicker of the same defiant spark she remembered from her home. She approached an old man, his face a web of weary lines. "I am Elara Vance of Xylos Prime," she whispered in their native dialect, a language she hadn't spoken in years. The old man's eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a dawning, fragile hope. "The Vance family, they died in the purge. One survived," she said simply, "and I am here to take you home." The word spread like wildfire, a whispered message of impossible salvation. Hope, a long-extinguished ember, began to glow in the darkness. She armed them with tools, with scavenged parts that could be turned into crude weapons. Her plan wasn't just to escape, it was to cripple the station from the inside. She organized them into teams, giving them targets, life support junctions, as communications arrays, fuel conduits. The signal to act would be the station's main reactor going offline. That was her job. She made her way to the reactor control room, a heavily guarded nerve center, using the element of surprise and the skills honed over years of solitary survival. She moved like a ghost, disabling the guards with silent, non-lethal takedowns. She reached the main console and, with a few keystrokes, initiated a full system shutdown. The station plunged into darkness. Emergency lights flickered on, casting the corridors in a chaotic red glow. Klaxons blared across Tartarus. Her signal was received. The prisoners rose up. The sound of explosions echoed through the metal halls as fuel lines were ruptured. The hiss of failing life support followed. It was chaos, a symphony of destruction. She raced back to the hangar, the sounds of battle behind her. The prisoners, her people, were fighting their way towards her, a desperate, ragged army fueled by years of repressed rage. They poured into the hangar, their faces a mixture of terror and fierce joy. Alara stood at the ramp of the Wraith, guiding them in, her plasma pistol firing in controlled bursts at the Dominion guards who were beginning to regroup. The last of the prisoners scrambled aboard. She sealed the ramp and threw the Wraith into the air just as a squadron of interceptors descended on the hangar, their cannons blazing. The ship lifted, silent and unseen, phasing out of reality just as the first plasma bolt struck the spot where it had been. From the safety of the void, she watched Tartarus burn. It was a dying star, consumed by internal fires, its systems failing, its orbit decaying. The Dominion fleet, caught completely off guard, could do nothing but watch. She had not just rescued a few hundred prisoners. She had extinguished a key Dominion asset and, more importantly, she had ignited a spark. Aboard the ship, there was a stunned silence, then a ragged cheer. The survivors of Xylos Prime, of a dozen conquered worlds, were free. They looked at her, at the silent, impossible ship that had saved them, with awe. Alara Vance, the scavenger, the ghost, had just become a symbol, a legend, and on the bridge of the Vigilance. Prefect Valerius watched the feeds from Tartarus, his face unreadable. He had underestimated his opponent. This was not just a strategist. This was a revolutionary. The game had changed again. This was no longer a hunt. This was a war. And it had just begun. The aftermath of the Tartarus liberation was a strange and unfamiliar landscape for Alara. The silence of the Wraith was gone, replaced by the sounds of life, the hushed, hopeful conversations of the survivors, the soft weeping of those overcome with the shock of freedom, the determined clang of tools as the more technically minded among them, led by a grizzled Xylonian engineer named Jorad, began to assist in the ship's repairs. For the first time in 7 years, she was not alone. The feeling was both a comfort and a profound disruption. Her solitude had been a shield, a wall she had built around the raw wound of her past. Now, that wall had been breached, not by an enemy, but by the very people she had sought to avenge. They looked to her as a leader, a savior, the Wraith of Xylos, a title that felt as ill-fitting as the Dominion uniform she had worn on the station. Jorad, the old engineer she had first spoken to, became her unofficial second-in-command. He was a man of quiet competence and deep sorrow, having lost his entire family in the Purge. He saw in Alara not a mythical hero, but a reflection of his own pain, honed into a weapon. "This ship," he said to her one cycle, his hands running almost reverently over a newly patched power conduit, "is more than metal and circuits. It is a promise. You have given us a weapon, Alara. Now we must decide what kind of war we are going to fight." It was a question that haunted her. Her war had always been personal, a quiet, methodical campaign of vengeance. But now, with hundreds of souls aboard her ship, their faces etched with the same loss she carried, her personal vendetta had become a movement. She had a crew, she had a cause, and she had the full, undivided attention of Prefect Valerius. On the Vigilance, the mood was grim. The Tartarus incident was a catastrophic failure, a public and military humiliation. Valerius stood before a holographic display of the incident, replaying the chaos, the impossible escape. He wasn't angry, He was fascinated. His opponent had not only outmaneuvered him, she had outthought him. She had used his own logic against him, predicting that he would never anticipate an attack of such audacious compassion. He had been looking for a ghost, a lone predator. He had found a messiah. She is no longer just a pilot. Valerius dictated into his personal log, his voice a cold, analytical monotone. She is a symbol, and symbols are far more dangerous than ships. They inspire hope, and hope is the currency of rebellion. We cannot simply destroy the Wraith. We must capture it. We must dissect it, and we must shatter the symbol it has become. Valerius initiated a new protocol, one reserved for the most dire of internal threats, the Cain Protocol. He unleashed the Seekers. They were the Dominion's elite intelligence division, assassins and spies genetically and cybernetically engineered for infiltration and psychological warfare. They did not operate in warships, but moved like shadows through the galaxy's underbelly, using blackmail, bribery, and terror as their primary weapons. Their leader was a chillingly effective operative known only as the Inquisitor, a woman whose name was a whisper of fear even among the Dominion's highest ranks. Her mission was simple: find the Wraith, not by chasing its shadow, but by tracking the ripples of hope it left in its wake. Elara, unaware of the new, more insidious hunt, was focused on her next move. With Jorad's help, she established a hidden base on a rogue moonlet, a dead rock adrift in the lawless outer rim. It was a place to repair, to regroup, and to plan. The survivors, a mix of engineers, medics, and old Commonwealth soldiers, turned the barren rock into a fledgling outpost of the Resistance. They began modifying the Wraith, using their collective knowledge and scavenged parts to enhance its systems. They installed a small but sophisticated medical bay, expanded the living quarters, and, most importantly, began to experiment with the sub-reality drive. They discovered that the harmonic resonator could be tuned to different frequencies, allowing the Wraith to not only phase out of reality, but to create micro-jumps, to teleport short distances within normal space, a maneuver they dubbed blinking. Their first real test as a unified force came when a distress signal reached them, a desperate, fragmented plea from a small, independent colony on the planet Viridia. The colony, composed of human and alien refugees, was being subjected to a pacification campaign by a local Dominion garrison, a brutal process of cultural erasure and forced conscription. Elara felt the old, familiar pull of her solitary instincts. A direct confrontation was risky, foolish, but looking at the faces of her crew, she saw her own past reflected back at her. She saw Xylo's prime. "Ooh, we go," she announced, the decision feeling both terrifying and right. The battle for Viridia was unlike any she had fought before. She was not a lone ghost anymore. She was a commander, using the Wraith's blinking ability. She conducted a campaign of lightning-fast guerrilla strikes. The ship would appear out of nowhere, disable the garrison's anti-orbital cannons, and vanish before they could lock on. It would blink behind their patrol ships, crippling their engines, then phase out before the wreckage even began to fall. On the ground, the former prisoners of Tartarus, armed and organized, led the local populace in a coordinated uprising. It was a symphony of chaos, directed by a ghost from a ship that wasn't there. The Dominion garrison, cut off from orbital support and besieged from within, collapsed in under a week. The victory at Viridia sent shockwaves through the outer rim. For the first time in a generation, the Dominion had not just been harassed, they had been defeated. The story of the Wraith, the ghost ship that could appear and disappear at will, spread from system to system, whispered in hushed tones in crowded spaceports and hidden asteroid bases. The symbol Valerius feared was growing stronger, but with that fame came a new, unseen danger. The Inquisitor's network was closing in. She didn't track the ship, she tracked the story. Her agents infiltrated refugee camps, offering food and medicine in exchange for information. They planted rumors, sowed seeds of distrust. They found a weakness, a single point of failure in the burgeoning rebellion, human desperation. On the rogue moonlet, Ilara felt the pressure mounting. More refugees were flocking to their hidden base, drawn by the legend of the Wraith. Her small, tight-knit crew was now a burgeoning community. And with that community came logistical nightmares, food shortages, failing life support, and the constant, gnawing fear of discovery. A young man named Reese, a survivor from Viridia whose family had been executed by the garrison, approached her. He was burning with a righteous fury, his grief twisted into a desperate need for action. "We need to strike again. Harder," he urged, his voice filled with a zealot's fire. "We need to hit a major military target. Show them we're not just freeing colonies. We're tearing down their empire." Ilara was wary. Reese's passion was a mirror of her own youthful rage, a fire she had learned to temper with cold, hard strategy. "A direct military strike is suicide. Reese, we fight a war of 1,000 cuts, not a single glorious battle." But Reese and a growing faction of the younger, more aggressive members of the resistance were not satisfied. They saw her caution as weakness, and that was the crack the Inquisitor had been waiting for. One of her agents, disguised as a refugee, befriended Reese, feeding his anger, validating his desire for a more direct approach. The agent provided him with intel, a tip about a Dominion staging ground in the Cygnus Rift, a lightly defended depot where a new class of dreadnought was being outfitted. It was the perfect target, a prize that would cripple the Dominion's regional fleet. It was also a trap. Reese, convinced he was acting for the good of the rebellion, bypassed Ilara's authority. He gathered a small team of like-minded fighters and, using a stolen shuttle, set out to raid the depot. Ilara discovered his plan too late. Her heart sank. It was a rookie mistake, born of grief and impatience, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it was a setup. "He's flying into a cage," Jorad said grimly, looking at the tactical display. "And we're the bait." She had a choice. Let Reese and his team be captured or killed, preserving the Wraith's secrecy, or risk everything in a rescue attempt that was almost certainly doomed. Looking at the faces of her crew, at the community that now depended on her, she knew there was no choice at all. "Prep the ship," she said, her voice hard as steel. "We're going in." The Cygnus Rift was a graveyard of stars, a place where the Dominion had chosen their killing ground well. As the Wraith phased into the system, Ilara saw it immediately. The depot was real, but it was surrounded by a network of cloaked sensor boys and a squadron of Seeker-class destroyers, ships designed specifically for anti-stealth warfare. Reese's shuttle was already caught, held fast in a tractor beam, its engines dead, and waiting in the center of the web, like a patient spider, was the Vigilance. Prefect Valerius was there. He hailed them on an open channel, his voice calm, almost conversational. "Ilara Vance, a pleasure to finally meet you. In a sense, you have fought a clever war, But compassion has always been humanity's greatest weakness. Surrender your ship, and I will allow the boy and his misguided friends to live." A holographic image of Reese appeared on her screen, his face bruised and defiant, a Dominion guard holding a plasma rifle to his head. "Don't do it, Elara," he shouted. Before the guard struck him silent, Elara's mind raced. It was a classic gambit, forcing an impossible choice. But Valerius had made a critical error. He, like Reese, had mistaken her compassion for a lack of ruthlessness. He thought he was trapping a hero. He had forgotten he was dealing with a ghost who had clawed her way out of a planetary grave. "You're right, Prefect," she transmitted back, her voice an icy whisper that carried across the void. "Compassion is a weakness." She turned to Jorad. "Route all available power to the drive. Prepare for a sequential microblink, maximum frequency." Jorad's eyes widened. "That's unstable. The core can't handle that many jumps in such a short sequence." "It will have to," she said, and then she gave the order that would change the nature of their war forever. "Target the Vigilance. We're not running. We're going to tear the heart out of his fleet." The Wraith vanished, and then it reappeared, for less than a second, directly behind one of the Seeker destroyers, firing a single, devastating plasma volley into its engines. Then it vanished again, reappearing on the opposite side of the battlefield, crippling another. It was a phantom, a blur of motion and destruction, blinking in and out of existence, sowing chaos and confusion. The Dominion fleet, trained for conventional warfare, was completely unprepared. They were trying to shoot a ghost with cannons. Valerius watched from the bridge of the Vigilance, his composure finally cracking. "Lock her down, saturate the area with sensor pings. Find her." But it was too late. The Wraith made its final blink, appearing not outside his ship, but inside his shield bubble, a feat of navigation so precise, so suicidally brilliant. It was inconceivable. It was meters from the Vigilance's bridge. For a moment, the two ships hung in space, a ghost and a giant, predator and prey. And through the viewport, Elara Vance and Prefect Valerius locked eyes. She gave a small, cold smile and fired every forward weapon she had. The blast ripped through the Vigilance's bridge, shattering the illusion of Dominion invincibility in a silent, brilliant flash of light. The war for survival was over. A new war, a war for the soul of the galaxy, had just been declared. The explosion was a silent, blinding flower of light that bloomed and died in the vacuum of space. The bridge of the Vigilance ceased to exist. For a heartbeat, the Dominion fleet was paralyzed, a headless serpent struck by a phantom it could not comprehend. In that critical moment, Elara did not flee. She blinked again, a gut-wrenching, metal-screaming maneuver that left her dizzy and tasting blood. The Wraith materialized beside Reese's captured shuttle, its hull glowing with residual energy. "Jorad, tractor beam, now!" she yelled, her voice raw. The beam locked on, pulling the smaller craft towards their open hangar bay, just as the Dominion fleet, command now defaulting to a dozen panicked captains, began to return fire with disorganized, furious volleys. Plasma bolts tore through the space where they had been seconds before. With the shuttle secured, Elara pushed the sub-reality drive to its breaking point, phasing them out of the Cygnus Rift and into the cold, silent sanctuary of the void. The ship re-emerged into normal space with a violent shudder, alarms screaming a symphony of failure. The sequential blinking had nearly torn the drive matrix apart. The harmonic resonator, the heart of the ship, was fractured, a hairline crack spiderwebbing across its crystalline surface. They were alive. They had won, but they were crippled. As Jorad and his team worked frantically to stabilize the core, Reese stood before Ilar in the cramped command center, his face a mask of shame and awe. "They were waiting for us," he whispered. "It was all a trap. I'm sorry." Ilara looked at him, not with anger, but with a profound weariness. She saw not a traitor, but a boy forged in the same fire that had created her. His grief a weapon he had not yet learned to control. "We don't fight with anger, Reese," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We fight with this." She gestured to the ship around them, to the crew working in focused, determined silence. "We fight with a purpose. Don't ever forget that again." The news of their victory, of the crippling of the vigilance and the presumed death of Prefect Valerius, spread like a virus. The Dominion's carefully constructed narrative of invincibility was shattered. On a dozen worlds in the Outer Rim, small acts of defiance blossomed into open rebellion. The legend of the Wraith was no longer a whisper, it was a roar. Their hidden base became a beacon, the heart of a nascent rebel alliance. Ships arrived, cobbled together freighters and retired patrol vessels, their crews a motley collection of idealists, opportunists, and desperate souls, all seeking the ghost who had defied an empire. Ilara Vance, the solitary avenger, found herself at the head of a fleet. She was no longer just a captain. She was an admiral, a leader, a symbol of hope, a role she neither wanted nor felt worthy of. But the Dominion was not dead. It was wounded, enraged, and far more dangerous. On the capital world of Zenith, a planet of sterile obsidian towers and cold, perfect order, the Inquisitor stood before the Dominion's High Council. Beside her, floating in a Bacta tank, was what remained of Prefect Valerius. His body was a ruin of burned flesh and shattered bone, but his mind, cold and brilliant, was intact, now housed within a network of humming cybernetics. His voice, now a synthesized rasp, was devoid of all emotion save for a chilling, singular focus. "She is not a terrorist," he stated, his new optical sensors glowing red. "She is a narrative. To defeat her, we must become the authors of a better story." The Kane Protocol entered its final, most insidious phase. The Dominion did not launch a fleet to hunt the rebels. Instead, they unleashed a plague of misinformation. Using their control of the Galactic comms network, they began to paint the Wraith not as a liberator, but as a harbinger of chaos. They staged false flag attacks, using ships disguised as rebel vessels to attack civilian targets, then broadcasting doctored footage of the atrocities. They infiltrated rebel cells, turning allies against each other with whispers of betrayal. They were not trying to destroy the rebellion's body. They were trying to poison its soul. Ilara saw the effects almost immediately. The unity of her fledgling alliance began to fray. Accusations flew. Fear and paranoia, the very tools the Dominion had used to rule for centuries, began to creep into their ranks. Her greatest weapon, her legend, was being twisted and used against her. She realized then that this war would not be won by destroying ships. It would be won by seizing the truth. "We can't hide anymore," she told Jorad and the newly formed council of rebel leaders. "We can't be a ghost. We have to be a voice. The plan she proposed was the single most audacious act of rebellion imaginable. They would not attack a fleet or a military base. They would attack the Dominion's heart, the Central Communications Nexus on Zenith. It was the most heavily defended structure in the galaxy, a planet-sized supercomputer encased in layers of impenetrable shields, from which the Dominion broadcast its iron-fisted control to 100 systems. Her plan was not to destroy it, but to hijack it. She would use the Wraith to phase inside the Nexus itself and broadcast her own message to the entire galaxy, undeniable proof of the Dominion's crimes. The raw footage from Tartarus, the last words of Kalen, the faces of the slaves they had freed. She would give the galaxy the truth and let them decide what to do with it. It was a suicide mission. The approach to Zenith was a gauntlet of naval patrols, minefields, and interdiction nets. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that Valerius would be waiting for her. He would anticipate her target, for he understood better than anyone that this was a war of ideas. The final confrontation would be a battle of wills between the ghost of Xylos and the machine who hunted her. As the Wraith, its core barely stable, its hull scarred from a dozen battles, prepared for its final jump, Elara walked through her ship. She saw the faces of her crew, a family forged in fire, their fear overshadowed by a fierce, quiet resolve. They were no longer just survivors. They were believers. She looked at Reese, now a disciplined and capable flight officer, and saw not a reckless boy, but the future of their cause. The mission was no longer about her past. It was about their future. They phased into the Zenith system and were met with silence. The defense fleet was there, a wall of steel and plasma, but it did not fire. It held its position, a silent, waiting predator. On her screen, a single transmission came through. It was Valerius. "I have been waiting for you, Elara." His synthesized voice echoed in the quiet of the bridge. "I have studied you. I have learned from you. You rely on the unexpected, so I have prepared for you a battlefield where the unexpected is impossible." As he spoke, a massive energy field bloomed around the Nexus, a shimmering web of gravitational distortions. "This is a reality anchor," Valerius explained. "It will not stop your drive, but it will make it difficult. It creates pockets of instability, gravitational shears that will tear your ship apart if you phase into them. You're flying into a minefield made of physics. There is no path through. There is only the end." What followed was not a battle, but a terrifying, beautiful dance. Elara pushed the Wraith and herself beyond every known limit. She did not try to fight the fleet. She ignored it. Her world shrank to the shimmering, deadly web of the reality anchor. She blinked, not across systems, but across meters, navigating the lethal pockets of instability, her hands flying across the console, her mind locked in a silent duel with the man who had laid the trap. The ship screamed, hull plates buckling, the crack in the resonator widening with every jump. She was a phantom dancing on the edge of a razor blade, a ghost navigating a storm of pure mathematics. She blinked through the final layer of the web, the ship groaning in its death throes, and materialized in the calm, silent heart of the storm, the central core of the communications nexus. They were inside. Alarms blared throughout the colossal structure, but it was too late. Dred slammed a data spike into the main console. We're in broadcasting on all galactic frequencies, across 100 systems, on 1 billion screens. The truth appeared. The sterile propaganda of the Dominion was replaced by the raw, undeniable reality of its cruelty. The galaxy watched, in stunned silence, as the lies that had held an empire together for a century dissolved in the light of truth. A single Dominion warship blinked into existence beside them. Valerius. His ship was damaged, having pushed through his own trap to reach her. You have won the battle of ideas. Vance. His voice transmitted, laced with something that might have been respect. But you will not live to see the victory. He fired. The plasma bolt tore through the Wraith's already failing core. The ship convulsed, a mortal wound. But as the core began to rupture, Elara did one last thing. She engaged the drive, not to phase, but to overload. The fractured harmonic resonator exploded, unleashing a wave of pure sub-reality energy. The wave did not destroy Valerius's ship. It did something far stranger. It phased the entire vessel, permanently, out of normal existence. The ship became a true ghost, a silent monument to a fallen predator, trapped forever between realities. The Wraith was dead, its systems dark, its crew battered but alive, adrift in the heart of the enemy's silenced fortress. The war was not over. The fall of the Dominion would be long and bloody, but its heart had been broken, its voice silenced. Rebellions, now armed with the truth, would rise. A new age was dawning. Elara Vance, the scavenger who had only wanted vengeance, floated in the wreckage of her ship and her past. She had not found peace. She had not erased the ghosts. But she had given the galaxy a choice. She looked out at the silent, awe-inspiring machinery of the Nexus, no longer an instrument of tyranny, but a beacon of hope. Her war was over. Theirs was just beginning. And for the first time since the sky of Xylos Prime had burned, she felt a flicker not of hope, but of something far more powerful purpose fulfilled.